All right, we're live. Hello, hello. I am going to finish reading this blog post that we started the other day about FarmKind, and the same guy has written another blog post actually on the same topic, so I'm going to read that as well. Now, where did we get to? I think it was just about here. We were reading. These are some posts from the EA forum. This was FarmKind's post. And I think we'd just about finished reading this last time when we stopped to do the debate. Probably should have read the whole constructive infighting post before the debate, to be fair. Although I think it was a constructive debate. I wonder if we'll read anything here that could have made it even more productive. So we've just read FarmKind's explanation that they had let Veganuary know about the campaign. It's sort of to reframe the debate around what's the best way of fighting factory farming as opposed to is eating animals bad. I think that's a good reframing. I always talk about most people are opposed to factory farming, and there's all sorts of surveys that have found that. But eating animals per se, I don't think you're going to have more than 50% of people currently being, saying that that's bad. There's a much higher bar to clear. Campaign encourages people to offset their meat this January, but to help fix factory farming. Yep. 3 top competitive eaters. Yeah, we read this. Hey guys, how we doing? Good to see a few people here on a Saturday afternoon. Okay, yeah. By working with individuals who eat meat, but who would be undertaking these meat-eating challenges anyway, we can reduce suspicion amongst entrenched meat eaters that our true motive is to make them vegan. It allows us to be authentic in our message that being unwilling to change your diet doesn't mean that you can't start helping animals. Hey, Rebecca, good to see you. Yeah, that's right, Rebecca. There is an interesting mix of charities. I made a little almost graph the other day showing the ways that they all would sort of work together to put pressure on factory farming. There's the Good Food Institute is one of them, which is obviously developing animal product alternatives and cultivated meat and stuff like that. And then there's also the Humane League and a couple of others which mainly do the corporate campaigns, which again is about, it's basically about gradually making animal products less appealing to produce and consume compared to the alternatives. But effective animal advocates have always been not that focused on individual diet change campaigns. I think mainly because they're just very, very expensive to be done at a level that's really needed to get good results, from what we can tell. Anything that is like public messaging, public marketing can be an infinite black hole of money. So yeah, they're not vegan activism. Although that said, the Humane League does do diet change activism as well as their corporate campaigns and stuff like that. I think welfare reform is good, but it's quite different from like carbon offsetting. Yeah, I see what you mean. Well, this article explained earlier on that FarmKind's calculations, pardon me, and I've considered a few of these different calculations, but FarmKind's calculations, as I think a lot of them do, have almost like disability adjusted life years from health economics, where you basically, if you have some amount of improvement in the conditions of animalism is equivalent to some number of animals being spared altogether, for example. So this was a bit of a twist, and prior to this, a lot of people had been sort of defensive on behalf of veganuary, and now, well, we're going to see that shall continue shortly. Now, this certainly changes things. Instead of a Machiavellian public backstabbing, we have an even more Machiavellian fake public backstabbing designed to trick tabloids into promoting both veganism and donating to effective charities. One EA forum commenter even likened it to kayfabe, the preservation of fictional conflict in WWE wrestling. Based, okay, good, we got the WWE analogy in here. That, however, did not settle the matter. Tom's announcement was welcomed by critics and answered some of the most immediate questions. The new questions it raised were deeper and more productive. Such as, oh, here we go, here's the constructive disagreement, right? Such as, whose buy-in do you need to claim a campaign like this is cooperative, and how much does cooperation matter? Number 2, how much should we be willing to harm one strategy to collect experimental data about another? Number 3, a little bit contest that framing of what's going on here. There's not all it is, right? They're trying to execute another strategy. It's not just collecting data. How do we measure the positive and negative impacts of a campaign like this? Very, hard question to answer. On that note, how much good or harm are vegan campaigns doing for the movement currently? Do we even know? Yeah, I mean, I can give my 2 cents on some of these. So there has been a recent review from Maya Mather's group at Stanford, who are very, very good on this research. Maya Mather at Stanford is one of the world-leading experts on meat reduction intervention research, I would say. And the kind of depressing finding from that group's review was that we don't really have many reliable interventions which reduce meat consumption in the long term to a meaningful degree. We don't really have good evidence for any such interventions, was their conclusion. I don't think I'm overstating that. And we've looked at, the relatively flat rate of veganism over time, which at times I've been optimistic that is increasing. But if you zoom out a little bit more, it looks pretty flat. The thing is, I mean, evidently people are going vegan, and some of those people are staying vegan, but a lot of people are not. One good point that I have updated on from the debate that I did on this topic, that off-cited figure about 86% or 84% of vegans eventually give it up. That's actually incorrect. That was a mistake in my video. That's the percentage of vegetarians and vegans combined. But the percentage of vegans who eventually give it up is lower, at 70%. So that was a really good, I'm grateful to Patrick for updating me on that point. Well, I guess that is not surprising thinking about it, because if you're sort of trying it out, I can imagine that a lot of people try out vegetarianism, but if you go vegan, I feel like it's a higher level of initial commitment. So I suppose it's not surprising that people are more likely to stick with it. Could just buy vegan food and give it to a homeless shelter. It's not that scalable though. I think even if by doing that you're like displacing meat meals, obviously you're feeding the homeless people as well, which is good, right? Um, Even if they would have otherwise been eating meat, you're going to have the constant cost of buying food all the time, basically, right? Um, yeah, what you want is sort of permanent wins that will be like advancements in the science of alternative proteins, for example, um, or policy changes, things which are going to be like step change victories, and scalable. That's the key thing as well. You don't want a situation where, hey, it turns out we can get people to eat vegan meals if we pay for all their meals, because then you got to pay for all their meals, right? Isn't meat consumption in the UK the lowest it has been? Yes, that's right, AQ. It has been going down and down on a per capita basis. So, you know, that's maybe an argument that there has been some success in meat reduction campaigns. Although I believe it's still true to say that the percentage of vegans has not changed as much or in the same direction, right? It's more like a bunch of people eating a bit less meat each. Well, this is pretty based. Rebecca, thank you for sharing this. NBA star Kyrie Irving donates 200,000 vegan Beyond Burgers to NYC Food Bank. That's pretty awesome. What else would I say on this? Yeah, the cooperation point. This is an interesting one. I have more to say on this, but I think it's going to come on to talk. Oh, well, yeah, I guess. I was kind of under the impression more that the Veganuary organization was more sort of in on it to a greater extent than it appears that they were, really. I think that is the main part of this that I'm. Well, there's a few things in the execution that we'll see. We'll see how much money is raised. I think the jury's still out on that, and I think that it's quite feasible that there'll be a situation where they actually add like double-digit percentage to the movement budget counterfactually. I did back at the envelope earlier. If 1 million people, which is a lot of people, but not impossible, if 1 million people signed up and gave £15 a month, it would nearly double the movement's budget. I think it was like 1.3 million would have to sign up to double it. Could happen. Yeah, the positive and negative impacts of campaign. I think it was interesting hearing Tom's arguments in his conversation with David Ram that this might not necessarily really reduce the rate of veganism much in the long term, which I suppose is has been my main concern on the negative side, is that it's another signal to people that they don't need to change their diet and that they don't need to go vegan. Obviously, that part is suboptimal, right? And I think that implicates more animals than the actual animals involved in the eating challenges, for example. But then there's also this thing about within the movement, you know, Veganuary didn't really weren't really that on board with it, as we're going to find out. And that has sort of second order effects for animals. This is the concern about infighting, right? And why my debate on this topic was very friendly with Patrick. And, you know, I think that there's lots of constructive discourse to be had, as this article's saying. But yeah, I think that is a major potential downside that people are concerned about. I would have thought people would buy higher welfare meat before donating. It's a small group they're targeting for donation. That would certainly be a worse use of their money. I think you'll be able to help. Well, that's an interesting. There's another interesting one, isn't it? I was watching some of my Vegan 2.0 videos, and I seem to have been like predicting this. There was a lot that I said before this campaign was, you know, even an idea, and that seems like relevant, you know. I spoke a bit about, well, you know, should you buy beef burgers if they were in fact so much cheaper than the plant-based burgers that you could give the difference to the animal charity and stuff like that. I don't think that that is the play. There would be less of a difference on the higher costs for high welfare meat, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good point. That might be a relevant demographic to kind of compare the potential donors to. And in which case, yes, you'd be right, there are not that many people who pay, you know, whatever it is, 10%, 20% extra to get the, you know, the higher welfare standard, the organic or welfare certification version. So maybe perhaps that doesn't bode well for the numbers. I'd like to know what their targets are for donations and how many donations they end up getting. I'd really like to know how many donations they end up getting. I hope it's successful for the sake of the animals. I also kind of hope it's successful for my own sake at this point, because I've kind of stuck my neck out on this. And if it ends up not raising any money, then, you know, clearly I'll have been wrong. If it does end up raising a load of money, though, it really could be game-changing for the animal movement. Like, it's not that much that would have to be raised. I think 100,000 people signing up would increase the budget, the current budget, by about 8%. So it's really feasible that it'll have a sizable impact, in my view. The discussion of these questions has been one of the most fruitful I've ever seen in the movement, but it's been scattered across EA forum posts and private group chats. Here I'm going to do my best to bring what I see as the most important points into one place. We'll take it question by question. Damn, that's a cool statement. I kind of agree with this. I've been saying that the discourse on this topic has been very rich, in my view. This is a very EA framing, and this is indeed, you know, an EA coded campaign. What we're not seeing here is questions about does offsetting make sense in principle, or, well, I guess, yeah, there are implicit empirical questions here, but it's kind of within this framing that this could well work, right? Which I mean, that again, that's my framing, but evidently it's not. Some people have a very high bar for that being the case. I can see Guardian readers donating, but not GB News viewers. Yeah. Well, it's tough, isn't it? Because I think part of the strategy was to go for people who have a very low likelihood of going vegan. Presumably, they do also have a lower likelihood than Guardian readers, as you say, of donating. But I think that it's going to be, yeah, the proportion. Well, is an untargeted group. I think that's the main thing. Alistair Stewart argued that movement unity should sometimes trump short-term utility. I think FarmKind are non-cooperatively using the visibility success of Veganuary to advance their own laudable, critical, neglected goal of getting more donations into the animal movement by publicly and explicitly undermining Veganuary and veganism/diet change in general. I worry this risks violating an important social principle along the lines of don't publicly and explicitly undermine other groups in the movement unless either that group is bad for animals or you have strong evidence that undermining them is good for animals. I want a big, diversified movement ecology featuring exploration, risk-taking, failure. But this isn't just a risk for FarmKind, it's a risk for Veganuary that they haven't consented to. Yeah, I think this is a really good point. We had a quote from this guy further up as well, I think. Yeah, saying kind of similar. And I mean, again, for me, I think this is the main concern about the campaign at this point. I think the risk for the norms with respect to how animal groups are expected to operate, with regard to each other, are probably important to preserve, and that that is a variable in the equation of how much animal suffering we're able to prevent in the longer term. So yeah, I think that's pretty well put by Alistair. I'm going to speak to someone from Veganuary on the channel about this. I'm going to be recording that tomorrow. So it'll be, well, maybe I'll put it on the channel tomorrow or Monday. That'll be an interesting conversation. Trying to play a bit of, peacemaking now in the wake of some of this. I think I would have approached my initial discussion of this topic a little bit differently, with a fuller understanding. I kind of, like I say, I kind of thought that Veganuary were more on board with it than they now seem to have been. One might argue that in this case, it was, again, I think it's kind of too early to tell whether it's what the long-term impact will be in that sense. Because there is a world where it increases Veganuary participation, we just don't know. One might argue that in this case, it wasn't even enough for Veganuary to consent because the campaign reads as an attack on veganism in general, and many other stakeholders understandably felt attacked. On the other hand, Veganuary did the work to build up the platform FarmKind is jumping off here, so it is arguably between the two of them. Yeah, that's an interesting point. If it was seen to be attacking veganism more generally, then even if Veganuary had been sort of in on it to the nth degree, some people are going to say, so what? And many other stakeholders felt understandably attacked. Yeah, a lot of people work on diet change campaigns, and it's, they're reading it as kind of rude, I guess, to their work that there's an implication or an explicit stating that some other method is going to be more impactful than the work you're doing over there, right? Now, of course, we should try to avoid seeing our own projects in a defensive way like that. There's all sorts of things that are suboptimal that, you know, one's life kind of ends up one being involved in, and that I think it's good to look at things objectively insofar as is possible, and try to not see it as like, well, as a diet change campaigner, I think this. You could be a diet change campaigner and think that some other method is more impactful. But I mean, this has been an interesting bit of Vegan 2.0 discourse, because I mean, I got savagely downvoted on one of the vegan subreddits when someone had posted something about this. And it was, FarmKind's attack veganuary and so on. And then it finished with saying something like, veganism is and remains the most impactful thing that you can do to help animals, or something. Pardon me, something like that. And I commented on it something like, well, I agree with a lot of what's been said here, but it's absolutely not the case that veganism is the most impactful way to help animals. And as I said in one of my videos on this topic, thank God it's not. Because it does, relative to the other things that we actually have, the other tools in the toolbox, it doesn't help very many animals. Relative to doing effective activism, donating to impactful animal charities, giving more, sharing more, doing more, as we do on Vegan 2.0, if veganism was the most impactful thing we could do to help animals, that implies the best that you can do is get to zero. So, and, maybe that's a bit of a too literal interpretation for, maybe the person just means like, it's very important that to be vegan to help animals, or something like that. Is not the most important thing, right? Just looking at the numbers. So that, I got about 20 downvotes on that comment. But hey, you know what? I'm right. So truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. True, Oppenheimer, true. And yeah, there's been a lot of times in this discourse where I can see myself, and I can sometimes see other people actually really challenging the way that they look at this. I can totally get that it's feels like a rude campaign, basically. Even if aside from like the impact we might think it might have on animals either way, kind of feels rude, right? If I'm vegan, or I'm trying to get other people to go vegan, if I work on diet change stuff explicitly, and then some like fairly new organization, by the way, FarmKind's only existed for like a couple of years, I think, or less. New kids on the block, right? Coming along and thinking that they know how to do it better than we've been doing it the whole time. I can totally see how it's rubbed some people the wrong way. But yeah, like I say, you should try as much as possible to take a step back from one's own role and say, I'm a vegan, and that's a very important part of my identity, and I feel probably quite defensive about that, because it's kind of the norm for that to be attacked, and for that to have to be something to feel that you need to defend. And now there's another group who's sort of ostensibly part of the animal movement, and they're attacking that, and it's reflexive to double down in a way. But yeah, that's a very good, the very apt statement, Oppenheimer. The truth will set you free, but it'll piss you off first. I think if you are finding something challenging to contend with like that, it's, that's where the growth is, right? Out of the comfort zone, that's where the growth is. Lewis Bollard, the patron saint of effective animal advocacy at coefficient giving, argued for a wide conception of stakeholders. This was big. Lewis weighing in. And somebody pointed this out to me shortly after I posted my first video about this topic. And this was one of the main things that gave me pause to think, oh, I'm on the wrong side of Lewis Pollard here. Because, in my mind, he's a very prototypical EAA guy, the archetype of effective animal advocacy. The guest on the Dwarkesh podcast, which yielded millions in donations to FarmKind. And he was not in favour of the campaign. We're going to read what he said. Whether Veganuary was in on it or not, I'm seeing vegan activists reasonably interpreting this as an attack on their advocacy. I think we should have a very high bar for deliberately starting a fight in the movement, and I don't think this meets it. That's the sort of key phrase that summarises, right? And we're going to discuss this. I think we should also have a very high bar for attacking well-meaning people doing good in the world, whether vegans, EAs, organ donors, aid workers, or long-termists. I appreciate that attacking vegans wasn't the campaign's intent, but I think it was the predictable result, and certainly how the folks in the Daily Mail's comment sections have gleefully interpreted it. Yeah, this is so well written. He's such a smart bloke, Lewis Pollard, isn't he? I think we have to have a very high bar for deliberately starting a fight, and I don't think this meets it. That's the one key phrase that I will remember from this, and I think that is framing some of my thinking about this currently. And then I like how this is written. I appreciate that attacking vegans wasn't the campaign's intent, but it was the predictable result. Yeah, was it? I mean, going to right of centre media with something like this is a bit of a dangerous game. And we've discussed how the Telegraph and the GB News and the Daily Mail all lead with the headline, someone left Veganuary, now they're doing a meat-eating campaign. That's the framing is very much like veganism lost, meat is back. Like it's another one of these headlines, right? And annoyingly, none of them have mentioned donations until like halfway through the article. And in the case of the Telegraph, it's actually paywalled. So that's not ideal. It's kind of a risk when you go to media that is usually anti-vegan. So yeah, attacking vegans wasn't the campaign's intent, but I think it was a predictable result. Yeah, interesting people in the Daily Mail comment section. I wonder how many of them have signed up to actually do the offsetting, or if they're just dunking on vegan. So now, of course, these might be different people from the people who do sign up. While we're on it, Lewis also saw the campaign as dishonest. I don't think FarmKind intended it this way, and I think the people behind it are deeply ethical people. But I think our movement is at its best when we hold ourselves to high standards, and that includes not deliberately misleading people. And creating a fake meat-eating campaign feels like it crosses the line for me. Was it a fake meat-eating campaign? They were saying that you could eat meat. I mean, maybe the post is just saying that the whole thing is confabulated. In their defence, I believe this campaign represents the FarmKind team's true beliefs. Yeah, yeah. Factory farming is bad, veganism is an ineffectual response, donating would be more consequential, and we should promote that instead. If there's anything dishonest about the campaign, it's the claim that the competitive meat eaters offset their consumption by donating, when in fact they were paid to act as spokespeople. Yeah, I did wonder about that. Perhaps it was deducted from their fee, hey? I mean, again, much like I say that the animals actually involved in the eating challenge, they're just much smaller number of animals than the number of animals implicated one way or another by the campaign. So too with those donations, right? I mean, the point of that was to set that up as something that someone might do, or to give a bit of an exploration of the concept. And debatable how well that was done in JJ DeLion's video. I still haven't seen any of the other content creators' stuff on this. I haven't looked for it either, to be fair. Has anyone come across any of that? I wouldn't mind if someone wants to put links to that in chat. Rocky Schwartz, EA NYC, made an interesting comparison to accepting donations from animal abusing industries and asked why they shouldn't be subject to the same scrutiny. Wondering how recipient charities actually feel about this. I know plenty of anecdotes of animal charities refusing donations from animal-based businesses. Open question on whether that's the right call, but I think it's a wide enough movement norm that it's worth evaluating FarmKind's approach alongside it. I don't think we should be turning down money. I mean, what would be the purpose of animal businesses giving to animal charities? Are we saying it's just some sort of humane washing situation? I think if it's an effective charity and it's able to use that money to save a lot of animals, I think it's going to help more animals than it harms, even if there is some sort of humane washing benefit to the company giving the money. I think it would be a rare situation that we would be turning down movement funds from anywhere, unless it's like, I don't know, unless it's like going to take up the organisation's resources to do something and you're basically then a contractor for an animal-based business. They're making this sound like donations, though. It's donations. Not seen any of it, no. Might have to go and dig some of that up, hey. I'm sure I can find the names of the influencers. Well, as Tom Norman said in the interview as well, that he did with David Rams, the charities that FarmKind donates to are not any part of the campaign, right? They don't have oversight of that or consent to it or sign off on it or anything like that. They're not implicated in the campaign in that sense. The right amount of infighting. Actually, well, other thing this reminded me of, though, an interesting question for people with the intuition that, there's no amount of donations that could justify eating an animal or consuming an animal, let's say. I wonder how many of them would accept a situation where an undercover investigator is working on a farm or working in a slaughterhouse in order to get footage of that for a documentary or something. Clearly, or for prosecutions, right? Oftentimes now they do it and prosecute for animal cruelty or for other things. Presumably when people do those kind of undercover investigations and have to go and work on a farm or work in a slaughterhouse, they are, even more proximally harming animals. But it's kind of understood in the grander scheme of things that they're not necessarily doing a bad thing to do that, because it's enabling them to get this footage, which is then going to help more animals in the future. So it's a similar dynamic, right? I wonder if people see that the same way. The right amount of infighting. Yes, I think this is a helpful framing. On one hand, infighting is bad. On the other hand, every person in the movement can't have a veto over every proposed campaign. Groups should hear out people's concerns, but there are times to still go ahead with a controversial campaign over the objections of our friends and allies. How do we strike that balance? This is very well written. This is very well considered. We have another thing on FarmKind to read from this same blog, by the way. Jerry Carbstrong had someone do that for his Pignorant documentary, had an activist get employed in a slaughterhouse to get undercover footage. Yeah. It's a very common thing for documentaries, I guess. And I can't help viewing those people as heroes for doing that, because they are, by definition, people who are going to be very sensitive to this and against this and upset by it. And they're going to go and put themselves right in front of it just to, get the footage. Don't know how much work, if any, that guy was actually involved with. Yeah, interesting. Well, I asked about this to Patrick, and he sent me something that said that investigators aren't usually actually doing the killing in slaughterhouses. I guess that sometimes they must have to. I mean, they must have to be doing something like coercive to animals in these jobs in general. Alistair Stewart again. I reckon the complete absence of infighting indicates a stagnant movement. The optimal amount of infighting is not zero. True. That's very wise again. Rocky Schwartz asked if a gentler, less anti-vegan message could have achieved the same outcome. How is FarmKind distinguishing its messaging between here is another option to consider if you care about animals from veganism is a bad option? The webpage certainly reads to me as the latter. C. Agreed. I don't see why the campaign must explicitly disparage veganuary. But another commenter wondered whether veganuary seeming against it is part of the bit. These media outlets hate veganuary and wouldn't cover it if they thought it was what they wanted. Interesting. Okay. FarmKind would not have gotten national media coverage in the UK for saying veganism is great, but you could also donate instead. Yeah, that's true. In a world where attention is the scarcest resource, nobody would be talking about this campaign if the message had been more cooperative. That's entirely true. That is entirely true. The whole story, and that's, it's I've been very uncontroversial in doing Vegan 2.0, where it's like you should try and be vegan and donate and do other impactful animal advocacy. It's no surprise that it gets to be the most interesting when somebody says you should actually do it instead. And then that kind of provokes the whole story. The whole story is anti-factory farming group says to forget veganism. You might think that's a bad story or worry that people won't hear the subsequent message and you should donate instead, but we have to admit they're getting far more attention this way. However, more attention doesn't mean the message will resonate with the right people, as C pointed out. It seems clear that there are many non-vegans who already donate to animal charities, but I am not convinced that these individuals are anti-vegan or anti-meat reduction to the extent that a competitive meat-eating campaign would move them to donate. It may even risk alienating them. A research report suggests that donors to animal charities are more likely to be vegan and vegetarian than the general population. Yes, that's probably true, but it's also true that the majority of them are still not vegetarian or vegan. They're a little bit more likely than the average population, but it's, still over 50% of them are meat eaters. I think wasn't that the one survey we looked on the YouGov survey in my video about this, where it's actually a lower rate of vegetarians and vegans. Probably different surveys have different points on that, I guess. It's an interesting sort of question. I also remember Mark Rober getting people employed at a scam call centre. They'd scam people for 10,000 but later pay them back 20,000, similar sort of thing. Damn. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. It's a dangerous game, isn't it? I believe, but I'm not 100% sure, the person part of the investigation for Pignorant that did night shifts and wasn't involved with slaughter, but I could be wrong. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I would say that it would be wrong in that case anyway, only because very similar to this, right? I think it's a good analogy. The expected value of, publishing that investigation and getting that out there, and people then eating less pork as a result of that, which we've, there is some evidence of that, is going to outweigh somebody having to perpetrate that. But Tom counters with a nod to the coolest, smartest, and not to mention most handsome research team ever to grace the animal movement. They're talking about Brian Research. Ah. Annoying. There's some research by an amazing organisation called Pax Fauna that when it comes to the messenger for an anti-factory farming campaign, people who eat meat are much more effective messengers to other people who eat meat than vegans are. Part of this is how can we make it clear, if you think about the audience that this is targeting, that other people like you also agree that donating to help farmed animals is a good thing. Yeah, this is a really, really key point, and I think I didn't do a very good job of making this point in the debate, that you have this much bigger group of potential donors who are meat eaters, and you can't really reach them with a message that is a vegan message, or you have a much lower chance of reaching them, let's say. So if you put some what would you, almost like performative meat eating in your campaign, then you can have a higher chance of reaching them. When we start talking about factory farming, the script in people's minds is that you've started talking about this, now you're going to ask me to change my diet. And so they've already stopped listening to us. We used to get comments about, I'm not going to go vegan, I love bacon too much, when we weren't talking about veganism at all. There's a lot of people out there where to reach them, we have to make it explicitly clear that we're not asking them to go vegan. If we had said you could do both, people wouldn't have heard what we were saying. Yeah, I think that's super true, and well expressed as well. I can tell that Tom spent some time thinking about how to say that concisely and precisely. There's this performative element of signalling, hey, this is a message from other meat eaters. Look, we're doing this wacky meat eating campaign. And that was a key part. And it's no wonder that it has rubbed a lot of vegans the wrong way, because it's not aimed at vegans. So I think that's a really, really good explanation of the central sort of controversial bit that explains the campaign and the theory of change. I can attest that Tom is representing my research findings accurately here. Also important to note, during the campaign, these spokespeople are participating in meat-centric eating challenges that all of us probably find horrifying, including eating an entire goat. But they were going to do these challenges anyway. The difference is that now their meat-obsessed audience will hear them talk about how they're offsetting their meat consumption with donations to FarmKind's preferred charities. Is it weightier that meat eaters are endorsing FarmKind, or that FarmKind is endorsing meat eaters? That's a hard question, but that is the question, not whether eating challenges that were going to happen anyway are harmful. Yeah, so this thing about the eating challenges were going to happen anyway, I brought this up in my conversation with Patrick, but I didn't necessarily endorse this point. I think these are people who do these wacky eating challenges. They do crazy eating challenges. They might have done some other big eating challenge otherwise. But I think it seems reasonable to assume in this framing that they are eating more meat than they would have done otherwise, right? They wouldn't have necessarily done a whole day of eating nothing but meat. I do grant the point, though, that you can probably only do so many wacky eating challenges in a month, let's say, or in a week. So maybe it wasn't adding too much to the total number of those if this is going to be that week's wacky eating challenge or whatever it is. I don't know. I'm not that convinced on this. The challenges were going to happen anyway. Point. It's like I was going to make YouTube videos anyway, but I probably have made more as a result of all of this than I might have done. But it's difficult to say. I might have just made videos about something else, right? I suppose that's the point. And to foreshadow the second half of this post, we have this comment from James Osden of Social Change Lab. I hope that anyone who thinks FarmKind's campaign is too much infighting against other animal groups was also outspoken when Animal Rising was campaigning against the RSPCA, which was way worse in terms of the reputational damage and change it tried to inflict, brackets to shut them down. Yeah, that's an interesting one. That is another example that this article is going to go on to talk about. And I suppose the interesting thing here is that it is sort of two of the opposite sides in this case. If you would think about it in terms of like animal rights versus animal welfare, or deontologists versus utilitarians, this was a case where an animal rights-based group was, in the end, changed their tune because I guess people in the movement had said this is not a good strategy necessarily. But going against a more pragmatic, this was a welfare certification scheme. And so, yeah, it's probably sort of opposite sides to the extent that that exists. Measuring positive and negative impacts. Ben Stevenson could have been speaking for me when he said, I'm pretty uncertain about the campaign overall, and I'm torn between thinking the pro-animal movement can and should be bigger than veganism, and feeling a little sad about messaging that risks undercutting veganism, which is an important part of my political identity. That's very self-aware. I do think, yeah, the pro-animal movement can and should be bigger than veganism. Yeah, I agree with that. As I said in my video on the topic, if you do have veganism as the price of entry, or the bar to entry, let's say, you're always going to have a very small portion of the population, as far as we can tell. So I do think it's good to have other ways for people to contribute and to sort of package them as well and lay them out and market them as this campaign has. Because, yeah, if this is what I was saying earlier about if veganism is the most impactful thing that you could do, that would not be a good situation for us. It would not be something that we should like, because it ain't that impactful in the grand scheme of things. And it's good that we have a lot more impactful stuff that we can do. Hey, Samuel, good to see you. I feel those examples are quite different. RSPCA financially benefits from the animal exploitation. Yeah, that's an interesting one. They get the license fee. There's definitely a little bit of perverse incentives, as with any auditing, I guess. I think that RSPCA is going to be filled with people who are animal lovers and mostly probably vegans. And this is, again, like quite a sincere thing on the organization's part, where they think that they are creating a world where there are higher standards than there would be otherwise. But in that case, I also did see the role for the animal rights people to say that the standards are not high enough, or that the standards are not being enforced. And there were some farms that were kicked off the scheme, right? And RSPCA sort of rescinded their membership and stopped taking their money and, withdrew their logo. So that's some signal that they were being good faith with it. But yeah, you'd have to be careful with those things. And some of them are just outright industry schemes. Like Red Tractor in the UK is just barely higher than the legal minimum standards, and yeah, it's just invented by industry to. It's like humane washing. Hey, outdoor boy. How do you wander in here? Nah, welcome. Hang around. We're Vegan 2.0. We're a broad church here. You just have to give to animal charity evaluators, and then we don't mind what you do. Yeah, you just have to give to FarmKind. But Stein van der Ploeg, Executive Director of Animal Charity Evaluators, urged us to look beyond vibes. I think I understand the worries and discomfort people feel about this approach, but I'm not sure how fruitful it is for us to all have a vibes-based conversation about the possible merits of this campaign. It already exists. It might end up doing good, it might end up being bad. We can make it better. If you think some of the risks taken and assumptions made by FarmKind are unaddressed, let's talk about how we can mitigate those. Let's also figure out how we can support FarmKind do what they intend to do for animals. And most importantly, let's make sure we learn from this campaign. This is a very wise person, you can tell. Because it says executive director. No, this is a good take. It might end up being good, it might end up being bad. That's my view currently. And yeah, I think that we can take some steps to mitigate potential harms. And of course, to learn from the campaign. But being open to this theory of change, I think that's a positive thing. We could be looking at serious increases to the total animal movement budget, and that is animals saved in the long term. Rocky Schwartz, very curious where FarmKind is drawing the line here. Like, is there some back-of-the-envelope calculation of likely harms of anti-vegan marketing to X dollars brought into animal orgs? Yeah, I think there probably is. Well, Tom Norman said on David Ram's that they actually think it's pretty low risk in terms of the anti-vegan marketing. And that seems surprising to me when he said it, but I kind of think he might be right. I don't think, again, the rate of vegans is very much flat on a zoomed out scale, between 1% and 5%. He also made the point that there's just such a high volume of news that for non-vegans, this is, for most people, it's going to be forgotten within a couple of months. So I don't think, there's a high volume of these ostensibly anti-vegan headlines. And so it's like the marginal disutility of one other is probably not that severe. I thought that's kind of true. I don't think that many people who were seriously considering going vegan now won't do it because of this. And I don't think that many people who are already vegan will quit vegan because of this. Annoyingly, it may mainly be shared by anti-vegans. But then I hope that some portion of those anti-vegans do actually put their hand in their pocket. Yeah, Samuel, I saw your comment on one of my videos saying this, by the way, which is a fair question. What do you mean by saved? So in the sense that you were asking about in that comment, as I recall, we're talking about saved from being born into existence. And there's kind of, I guess if you think about it in a utilitarian sense, there's kind of an implicit is implicit that their lives are net negative, such that they're better off not having been born. And I think that's reasonable to think, certainly for factory farmed animals. And although, yeah, we were talking earlier about some of the mechanisms, there's organisations like the Humane League in there, which do corporate campaigns, as we know, through the Fast Action Network, as well as diet change stuff. There's also organisations like the Good Food Institute, which are making animal product alternatives better and cheaper and have more supportive public policy and investment and things like that. So there's a few different levers in play in terms of how that actually, reduces the number of animals farmed. Yeah, no problem. But yes, as someone pointed out earlier, not very much of it is actually diet change related, and that's very EA. EA has, typically considered other interventions other than diet change things to be, better value, basically. And you can't argue with results for the most part. I mean, the thing with the percentage of cage-free eggs that I put on a short the other day, that's crazy. Like, there's such quick progress. Wasn't it in a decade from about 10% to about 60% or something crazy? Aren't private companies making most of the alt protein development, not charities like Good Food Institute? Well, yes, that's true, Rebecca. There's also academic centres, which Good Food Institute do, academic grants to sort of invest in more people being experts in this area, essentially, and fund research at universities. And they also do a lot of policy engagement. Like in the UK, we have 3 quite large government investments in alternative protein research centres. One of them is NAPIC, the National Alternative Protein Innovation Centre. There's 2 at Imperial, and then there's also a cultivated meat one based mainly in University of Bath. And, GFI will have certainly been quite instrumental in getting those things set up, and they do other things as well in the sort of ecosystem around investors and they do a lot of things to advance the whole protein field in general. But yeah, funnily enough, I did post in an effective animal advocacy Facebook group, I guess, years ago, saying, can I just donate to private companies? I think I said something like, I've just Googled, can I give money to companies? And unsurprisingly, there's not, no one else seems to have asked this. This is before ChatGPT, of course. Now, of course, you can and just say, this is just a grant that I make to you or something like that. But yeah, it's difficult with the private companies because investors will spend a lot of time trying to work out which of them has the best technology and the best team to execute it, and management and all this kind of stuff. And in many ways, they're competing against each other as well. British Hen Welfare Trust and Fresh Start for Hens are the only charities saving lives at scale. I don't know about that one. What do they do, AQ? Do they rehome saved hens? But then who's doing the saving, and in what context is that happening? Because if it's like rescues, that's probably quite expensive per animal. I think FarmKind is not considering that being vegan helps companies like Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat. That's a good point. I do think that is actually an underrated benefit of being vegan, honestly. And in the past, Good Food Institute have made a lot of saying that the majority of consumers of plant-based products are not vegetarian or vegan, but meat eaters. And I think that's probably true, but I think that a larger portion of the volume is going to vegetarians and vegans because you're going to be eating it, several times a week potentially. I eat plant-based meat every day. But yeah, I think that is an underrated benefit of being vegan, that you become the staple, reliable market, so that companies like that can basically exist and have a reliable consumer base. And in so doing, they can then, reinvest, improve their products, get them to be better, get them to be cheaper. The rehome hens that would be killed. Yeah, interesting. I mean, so it's a very proximal, you can point to the actual chicken and the actual slaughterhouse that it would have gone in otherwise. So I can see that it's very salient. But rehome, I mean, that's got to be limited, right? How many potential hen homes can there be? But Lauren, me, and animal advocacy careers doubted our ability to gather that data. I felt sceptical that it's possible to evaluate this in a meaningful way to be able to learn from it, which I think is one of the main pros of trying something new. It would be quite hard to measure any negative effects of the campaign on societal views. It seems more likely that it would be evaluated solely based on receiving X amount of donations for FarmKind and related charities. Yeah, there's probably true. I mean, there are ways that you could try to investigate what, if any, negative impact it had on societal views of veganism. There is going to be some natural... let's have a look at the new Finder numbers, actually. There is going to be some variance in the number of reported vegans year to year. No, this is still last year's. There is going to be some variance in that number already, but there would be a way to detect if it was, very different from what was expected, or Veganuary participants could be another way of doing it. If the number of Veganuary participants went down when it was expected to go up, or when, didn't go up as much as it was expected to, that might be some indication of a negative effect of this campaign. Now, of course, it's going to be impossible to isolate that, but I feel like there's a few things you could do to try and triangulate that. Whether that will happen, we'll see. Tom Billington, monitoring and evaluation expert from the Mission Motor, responded with slightly more optimism. I don't agree that it's impossible to meaningfully measure the effects, but it would be pretty difficult and require a lot of forethought and investment. Of course, every project should have robust M&E, measurement and evaluation, but especially projects with significant risks of negative externalities. Yeah. Stein concurred. Trying new approaches in this complex and relatively new space is great if you thoughtfully measure if it works or not. Measurement and evaluation are especially important because there are backfire risks, and because this is a deeply underfunded cause area, we cannot afford to be careless. It can be easy to falsely attribute successes and failures. So what are some indicators that this might demand pivoting versus repeating? Yeah, well, I think the main ones, and this is absolutely right? There's it can be easy to falsely attribute successes and failures. So even if Veganuary participation went down, let's say, you could look at that and say, oh, look, Veganuary participation went down. That's why they're more than expected, right? Because perhaps it would have gone down anyway. And it is always going to be estimates and expectations, because, of course, you don't know what would have happened in an alternative universe. So I think what you would want to do is look for several indicators that triangulate on the same thing. But basically, yes, we're going to be talking about the amount of money raised. And I think that it is not... I think that it's conceivable that it causes enough of a bump in funding that we could be fairly confident that we wouldn't have got that bump otherwise. Right, if 1 million people did it, it'd double the movement budget. And I think in that case, we'd say, well, that was the first year that we did this donating instead of diet change approach. British Hens Welfare Trust rehomed 1 million. Wow, really? That's cool. 60k annually. But my point was really that they have been saved, yeah. Well, fair enough. That's pretty, that's more impressive numbers than I might have guessed. Evan Boyard testified to the trade-off on a person-to-person level. I know 3 people who have confided they considered going vegan, but instead chose to donate to FarmKind or other effective, though not always pro-animal, charities. If persuasion is... Well, that's not good. It's anecdotal, right, but it's nothing. If persuasion is the method by which these goals we share will be achieved, then these people on the margin are especially valuable, and it is a loss to not have them as the same kind of active allies. However, there is a much larger pool of people who probably never considered caring about farmed animals in the first place that FarmKind has a better chance of nudging towards care than vegan messaging. So they're saying they know some people who were considering going vegan and then didn't. That's just what I was saying a minute ago. It probably didn't happen very much. I mean, again, this is anecdotal. We don't really know how widespread that is. And yeah, the person's saying... It's interesting how this is phrased as well. This is... Again, it's a good sign, a sign of growth and a sign of critical reflection if you are finding yourself having to rethink and rewrite arguments that you sort of thought you knew the answer to when you started them. Because this seems like, I'm wrong here, but this seems like these people on the margin are especially valuable, and it's a loss to not have them. They put as the same kind of active allies. This seems like they wanted to say to not have them as allies or to not have them as fellow vegans, but then reconsidered and said, well, maybe if they're donating, then they will be. They could be considered allies. And maybe it's not a loss to not have them as vegans if they're going to donate instead. Maybe that does help more animals. It does certainly seem like a loss for these people to not go vegan. But it also seems very possible that they could be helping more animals this way. Now, of course, doesn't have to be one or the other, right? They could do both. And maybe they yet will do both. There's one thing that I brought up, the moral consistency effect might end up outweighing the moral licensing effect, whereby these, vegan curious people who say, oh, we'll do the donations instead, maybe if you ask them again in a year, that has really solidified their thinking on this and their identity as a pro-animal person, and maybe they're vegan. So, who knows? Laurie argued that FarmKind's campaign doesn't fit the usual spirit of offsetting. If we take a parallel with the climate movement, companies are encouraged to offset their residual emissions. After companies have done their best to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as much as possible, they can offset the inevitable emissions that cannot be entirely reduced. Similarly, in the animal movement, Global Food Partners encourages companies in Asia to purchase offsets if they cannot buy cage-free eggs as part of their supply chain. Here, this Forget Veganuary campaign portrays offsets as a simple solution to avoid any diet change, and I think that's a dangerous, slippery slope. Okay, yeah. So they're saying offsets are more like a last resort in these other contexts. Yeah, it does seem like it would be a bit less antagonistic framing, certainly, if they had said, this is, some people can't be vegan because they have certain health conditions or something like this, like some, what about Eskimos, right? That's what people say. If it had been framed as if you can't be vegan for some reason, you could do this instead. But then again, it's back to the point about getting the media attention, isn't it? They really did a calculated risk to try and get media attention, and they're still trying to do more media throughout the month of January. So I think there is a lot still that we don't know. I'm pleased to read these EA people, rhyming with me on that point, that the jury's still out, basically. And I mostly agree with what's been said about the limitations of measuring these things and other considerations that we might have. David Rams agrees. When it comes to animals, if you exploit and kill an animal, you can't offset that. You literally can't offset what you did to that individual. The word does a lot of work. Yeah, this is true. On the individual level, yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, it's like a trolley problem, isn't it? You're flipping the switch and you're going to say, all right, we are going to kill the one guy on the other track then. With a broader understanding, we might say that there's a greater good or more utility preserved. But that's little comfort to the one person on the other track, isn't it? So from that one's perspective, then then obviously, right. Tom mounts a defence of offsetting that outs him as a Sandcastles reader. We share the same ultimate goal, which is to end the exploitation of animals by humans. The question is, where are we in that journey? Reasonable people can disagree about this. I think, sadly, we're probably a really long way from it. In that context, the tools that make sense to us are quite different than if we were much closer to the end. We're in an environment where eating meat is normal. Most people think of that as the default. Our best evidence suggests that the current strategies people have developed on this aren't having the overall societal impacts that we'd like to see. So if that's not where we are, if we can't solve that problem right now, can we get people to take some positive actions right now? That's why we think offsetting makes sense. Yes, there's no amount of money that you can pay to make that pig or chicken alive again and give them a good life. But in the aggregate, you can prevent the next chicken from being stuck in a cage all her life. You can prevent the next pig from having his teeth removed without anaesthetic. You can prevent the next 1,000 shrimps from being killed without stunning or having their eye stalks crushed. Yeah, and this is what we understand to be the case with veganism as well, right? It's about preventing future demand, always. This is like, some people say, well, by the time I get the animal, it's already dead. It's like, okay, that's you understand how this works in the long term there, right? Yeah, David Rams was in chat for the debate. That was awesome. I wanted to soy out about that, but I was in the middle of the debate, so I didn't think I should stop. But I was kind of internally soying out. I have to agree, the word offset is too simplistic and misleading. I think offset is right. Again, it's not at the level of that individual, right, but on aggregate. Yeah. How much downside risk does harming veganism represent, actually? This is an interesting question. An anonymous commenter argued that we have to apply the same scrutiny to veganism that we're applying to the FarmKind campaign. Much of the conversation above seems to lean on the assumption that veganism is helpful to the movement, and not just helpful, but either 1, more helpful than donating, or 2, easier to get people to do than donating, or some combination of the two. I mildly lean in the direction that we should focus less on veganism, and that suggests the upside here is larger and the downside risks smaller. That is, I don't think this will lead to meaningfully fewer vegans, and even if it did, that seems worth it. Yeah, I think I kind of agree with this. Well, so there's the 2 points, right? How many animals does it help, and how easy is it to get people to do? And I think, as I argued in my video on the topic, veganism compared to donating helps relatively few animals and is much harder to get people to do. And this ties in with Tom's points about where we think we are in the whole journey. Hey, Soy Daddy, what's going on? Good to see you. Jeffrey Yip agreed. Whatever concerns you have about the FarmKind, veganism itself hasn't delivered great results in terms of building the animal movement. Want to highlight there's tons of former vegans, source vibes, and former Veganuary participants, source more vibes, that still have animal welfare sympathies but gave up on permanent veganism because of all the inconvenience that the campaign is highlighting. Worth tapping into that pool for donations. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Ex-vegans. Some ex-vegans go on to become anti-vegans, but that is not always the case. And in fact, I would say, well, I don't know. If ex-vegans seem like they would be more sympathetic than the average. And as we know, they are 70%, not 84% of, all-time vegans. So there are more than twice as many ex-vegans as there are current vegans. The ex-vegan subreddit is an interesting place there. I posted some Vegan 2.0 stuff there with this in mind, like maybe we can get some of these ex-vegans to donate. But it was pretty hostile. Not going to lie, it was pretty hostile. I don't know if that's fun. It's like anything with Reddit, really, isn't it? It's perfect, like, echo chamber creator. And that tends to lead to more radical versions of whatever view. So the ex-vegan subreddit seems pretty anti-vegan, although those are totally not the same thing necessarily. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of FarmKind supporters are ex-vegans who have sympathies, they agree with it in principle, and then there's practical reasons why they stop being vegan. And it's useful for us to have to still have these people contributing rather than just walking away and everyone in the movement having this attitude of like, well, if you started eating dairy, then fuck off forever. And do you know what I mean? Like, we're always going to be limiting ourselves if we do that. A lot of people there aren't even ex-vegans. Yeah, well, I don't know what to believe on Reddit anymore, Oppenheimer, since the Reddit whistleblower saying they did an AMA and they worked for the meat industry, starting shit in the vegan subreddits, basically. I don't know what to believe over there anymore. It seems like harder to see people's post histories than it used to be as well. Is that a new thing on Reddit that they've changed? It used to be easier to click on someone's profile and you see everything that they've posted. Maybe you can have like different privacy levels or something like that. Because sometimes you'll click onto a profile who's posted a comment and it says that they haven't posted anything. And you think, well, clearly not. Joseph Ankian applauded FarmKind for following through on what many have been saying. Since the 90s, there have been texts heavily criticising the focus on individual diet change in the movement, and yet little had been done to actively distance part of the pro-animal movement from that narrative. I'm impressed that FarmKind put their money where their mouth is to see if it's worth it. Well, that's interesting. Since the 90s, there have been texts heavily criticising the focus on individual diet change in the movement. Yeah, I mean, it really does seem that this is like most people find it difficult to be vegan. Most vegans stop being vegan. If we as a movement say, you are not part of the movement unless you're vegan, that I don't think that's helpful to animals. They added a feature where you can hide your post history. Oh yeah, that sucks. Nice. Oh yeah, that is useful. I guess people probably engage a little bit more if they have the option of not having all of their previous posts on show. Because you always see people getting ripped, don't you, for certain comments, and then people go on their profile and go, oh, you were posting about this the other week. This is super interesting, though. They've been totally criticising the focus on individual diet change in the movement. I mean, I feel like I can understand this as well. I feel it makes so much sense that we would be very, very defensive about the diet change part. There's another thing I've thought on this as well, right? What would our enemies want us to be doing? I was Googling earlier to try and see if there had been any livestock industry groups responding to this campaign. Because that'd be quite a good indicator, that'd be informative to us, right? If there were, the National Pig Association or whatever saying one way or another, this is good or this is bad. If some livestock lobbying group came out and said, we endorse FarmKind's campaign, we think that this is great, and, you don't need to be vegan and just do donations instead, that ought to give us all pause and go, hang on a minute. maybe this is not the approach. There's been a conspicuous lack of anything like that happening. I don't think that I have seen anyone condemning it either. Now maybe they're just when your enemy's infighting, don't interrupt them. But I think if the industry could choose to have us all do one or the other, do our own quiet personal boycott, or start to fund the professional machinery and organizations that are going to put systematic pressures on factory farming from different angles and are going to eventually squeeze it out for alternatives. I really don't think they want us doing that. And funding things, I mean, there's another thing like I'm into here. In left-leaning spaces in general, which, veganism is, and vegan circles are, people are often a little bit suspicious about funding things. There's always like a bit too capitalist to just be throwing money at the problem. People want the answer to be like collective action and protest and stuff like this. But like, fucking money makes the world go round, I'm afraid, right? It's how we all need it. We all trade in it. And obviously if groups that want to make things better for animals have more of it, then they can make things better for animals more. So I really, I think that was in my sabotage video about memes you would kind of try and promote if you were trying to sabotage the animal movement. One of them is like anti-donors, right? To be like we're celebrating Ricky Gervais giving to all these animal charities. If you were undercover anti-vegan, it'd be easy to be like, oh, fuck him, he's rich anyway, like, he thinks that he can just throw his money around or whatever, like be kind of performatively ungrateful or denounce the donations or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, that seems like a feasible thing that some lefty vegans might be inclined to do, and to not get that was a bad thing for animals. Obviously, this is a lot more of a controversial campaign than that, but fortunately, we don't need the consent of most vegans for animal charities to benefit from this campaign. And this goes back to the wasp cake thing, right? FarmKind deliberately taking the role of being unpopular here. Must have been a hell of a couple of weeks for their team, by the way, because I'm sure that a lot of their close friends in the animal movement, many of them may not have agreed with the campaign and may have thought this is a bad thing and been shocked and so on. It's so interesting to be in the throes of it, because I do see people's opinions going either way, and the smart money seems to be holding their opinion to see what happens. That's kind of my position currently, although I've come out largely in favour of the theory. Uh, I defended the execution a little bit in my conversation with Patrick Raceroff, but honestly, the execution could have been better from what I have seen. But I think in theory that this can really help a lot of animals. Sanarag Basu, I've worked with this guy, Elevate Philanthropy, pointed out that this isn't just a matter of welfare versus veganism, since some of the recipients of FarmKind's donations are working on institutional diet change. Oh, here we go. Someone was asking about if they're working on any diet change stuff. In case some people are worried that this is purely potentially beneficial for welfare reforms and not meat reduction and animal liberation on the whole, 2 of FarmKind's 6 top charities aren't welfare-oriented. Good Food Institute in Alt Proteins and Dansk Vegetarisk Fordening in institutional reform. Good Food Institute, of course, we spoke about doing all sorts of tasks to make alternative proteins more appealing and more accessible. And the Danish Vegetarian Society have been very, very successful in getting a ton of buy-in from the Danish government and funding for more plant-forward foods in public catering, and that's going to be, going to impact a lot of meals. They're still not, I guess the Vegetarian Society, you could say, is on the road, but they're not necessarily like vegan campaigning charities on an individual level. So it's like diet change advocacy, but at an institutional level still. The main theory there is just like there's fewer organizations and they're bigger. So if you get a supermarket to adopt a new policy, it affects way more animals than if you get a person to adopt a new diet, basically. And so that's why it's scalable. One of many defenses of veganism, but as somebody pointed out in the chat earlier, you do kind of need both approaches. And somebody said that vegans support companies like Impossible and Beyond. And yeah, that's true. You do need consumers who are willing to go and buy the alternative proteins if the alternative proteins are getting developed. So that's clearly synergistic with having more vegans. And you need people to take part in those campaigns as well, like the Fast Action Network. So again, clearly that's you need some more vegans, or well, I guess you wouldn't necessarily have to be vegan to do that, but you need people who are committed to working on these. My framing is Vegan 2.0 because I think that vegans already have a relatively high level of personal commitment. And honestly, I think that the things that I am additionally asking vegans to do are a lot easier than being vegan seems to be for most people. And so many vegans in my experience just like have so much more to give. They're very keen to be making a difference and wanting to know what can I do on a personal level. That's the main question that Vegan 2.0 is trying to answer. One of many defences of veganism was put forward by Alistair Stewart, who argued that the difficulty of veganism is one of its selling points. Interesting. I suspect successful social movements and religious and militaries and other powerful orgs expend quite a lot of resources on enforcing internal, sometimes arbitrary norms relating to personal behaviour and relationships. We are emotional beings in need of costly signals to bind us together. Veganism plays an important role along these lines for the animal movement currently, whether we like it or not, and it seems like a good one to me. Well, that's an interesting perspective. We're emotional beings in need of costly signals to bind us together. Yeah, costly signals is like the idea that you are broadcasting some sacrifice that you've made in order to communicate something about yourself. It is interesting that, like, at so many of the events I go to, I'm vegan, right? So I don't do this, but there's so many of the events I go to, I'm like, imagine if someone like ate a bit of meat right now, everyone would go crazy. And that's interesting that there is that taboo. Like if you were, you know, if you were getting up to no good in a movie and you were trying to pretend to blend in with a meeting, and you came to this meeting and you accidentally ate a bit of meat, everyone, you wouldn't know it, but everyone, that would be like a trigger for this whole meeting. Costly signals. Yeah, I'm trying to think what else is in that category. So they're basically saying that this has like improves group cohesion or group identity or something like this. Yeah, okay, luxury goods, extensive education. True. I feel attacked. That is true though, right? Education is largely about a signaling mechanism. It's like a quick way to signal to others and to assure others I have a certain level of expertise, you can trust me, I've put in time and hard work towards a project of this particular type. And it's costly in the sense of spending lots of time and effort on doing it, and actually, actually costly in many cases. The other example I just Googled there was peacock feathers, which I guess take up a lot of energy to grow. That seems like a crap explanation of that. Peacock's elaborate tails bracket sexual fitness. An extravagant resource-intensive display signaling health and good genes to pinch mates. I mean, yeah, okay, signaling, yeah. Resource-intensive, okay, so I guess it does take a lot of energy to maintain or something. And of course it makes you very conspicuous to predators, no? Or I guess they use their tails to kind of fight off attackers sometimes, do they? Am I making this up? Is that something peacocks do? Feels like it's like the opposite of camouflage, right? Imagine trying not to get eaten, you're a fucking peacock. So yeah, I mean, it is, there definitely is this thing of like binding us together, and it's an important part of our identity, and there surely are some benefits to that. But then it's dangerous if that becomes like the central thing in the identity, when it's actually keeping a lot of people out who would otherwise be helping, and having us kick people out if they decide that they can no longer follow a vegan diet. So I think, you know, this positioning as being for ex-vegans, I think is a helpful one. Yeah, the new USDA food pyramid. Yeah, I might have a look at. So I haven't really looked at it in detail. I probably want to research it and maybe make a video about it. It's gonna be bad for animals regardless, I think. Yeah. I noticed that they couldn't. They've got like this edgy inverted pyramid, right, with the thick wedge at the top. But I noticed that they couldn't bring themselves to actually make that whole big top bit meat. It's only the top left corner on the version that I've seen. And then there's actually just a load of fruit and veg over here. I was thinking about doing some sort of like, I don't know, like I said, I haven't looked into the USDA thing at all at this point. And I don't know if there are specific numbers. I feel like I would have seen them reported if there were. Or if it's just sort of meant to be like estimated based on those graphics, in which case, is meat like a much larger area of that graphic than it was on the previous one? Or does it say somewhere in the guidelines that meat consumption should be going up or something like this? I feel like this is one of those things where it's implied more than it is said, kind of because it's they wrote a version where they said you should eat a load of red meat, and then people evidently said, oh fucking hell, we can't actually say this, we're going to give everyone heart disease. But it still wants to be implied. I don't know, I'm thinking of the Dublin Declaration here, but I don't know, like I said, I haven't really looked into it much, so I could be way off. Bjorn Olafsson, fellow Substacker focused on animal advocacy research, questioned the negative assumptions about veganism. I haven't seen any evidence that FarmKind's underlying assumptions are correct. One, that many people are more willing to donate than go vegan. And two, that these donations won't serve as a blockage point for further pro-animal actions like diet change. They might very well be, but I think great to dive into them. Well, I think there is evidence that people are more willing to donate than to go vegan by just the fact that more people do currently donate to go vegan. Although, in fairness, somebody pointed out on my video that I didn't have the number of people who donate to farmed animal charities. And that might actually be a similar number as the low, 1 to 5% of people who go vegan. And probably is at the moment. Now, I do feel that there hasn't been a mobilised campaign like this one that says the main thing you should be doing is donating to these farmed animal charities, whereas there have been lots of campaigns saying the main thing that you should be doing is going vegan. But yeah, I mean, effective animal advocacy has always been kind of skeptical of individual diet change as a impactful way of making things better. In the past, I've not had funding from EA sources because I was doing too much diet change oriented stuff, when they want you to be doing stuff about institutional campaigns and stuff like this. So, that whole movement has for a long time said that there are more impactful things than diet change. Certainly on, for a charity to do anyway. But James Osden, a seasoned researcher himself, worried that this was double standard, applying a more rigorous test to FarmKind than to veganism in general. On point 1, the baseline to beat is 1% of the US/UK as vegan after 40 years of diet change advocacy, so I don't think the bar is that hard. Yep. On 2, I think we should be wary of isolated demands of rigour. Has the pro-vegan camp ever shown that going vegan isn't a blockage point for further pro-animal actions like donating or advocacy? Yeah, that's true. That's true. What I thought on that as well. And this is where you get into presenting it as a trade-off. I think, most of the initial responses I've seen on this, and probably the most common response I've seen on this has been, well, why not do both? You can do both, be vegan and donate, right? Which, I mean, yeah, okay, that's obviously true. Now, there's a point about, can we unlock more donations if we explicitly go after people who are not going to go vegan? But yeah, in this case, he's saying, well, you're saying that people might donate and think that that's enough and they don't need to go vegan now. What about people who have gone vegan and they think that that's enough and they don't need to donate now? And again, if we think that the donations are doing more than the diet change, then if you have a choice of someone doing one or the other, like somebody had commented on my post, should vegans stop being vegan and just donate instead? And I thought, no, but if you were going to do one or the other, then, do the one which helps more animals, and we think that's pro-donating. Has pro-vegan camp ever shown that going vegan isn't a blockage point for further pro-animal actions like donating or advocacy? As there sure are a lot of non-active vegans out there. True. So basically just think we shouldn't put undue burden on new things to show they're non-harmful when things that are the status quo didn't face the same scrutiny. Yeah, really good point, well made. Yeah, it's talking about like a moral licensing kind of thing. how many vegans are there in the UK? We were talking earlier about if 1 million people would donate. I think it's about 2%. Well, this says 1% in the UK. I think I've seen about 2%, but let's say 1%. And what's our population? 70 million? UK population. Yeah, about 70 million. So 1% would be 700,000. So if every vegan in the UK would donate £15 a month to effective animal charities, it'd add on about 50% to the overall animal movement budget, which is huge. I really think that there's a very attainable bar to a massive increase in the movement funding. Bjorn counted that veganuary has extensively researched their impact and found more positive evidence than most other diet change interventions. Ensuing discussion about the validity of that research was inconclusive and highlighted how damn hard it is to measure most animal advocacy interventions other than corporate welfare campaigns. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably true. I do think that veganuary... I'm a big fan of veganuary. I do think that veganuary is one of the more impactful diet change initiatives out there. And I've written about that in the conversation, as we've seen. Eleanor Macquarie from ACE was thrilled by everyone's newfound enthusiasm for measuring results. Excited everyone is so keen on measurement and evaluation. I'm sure we're all holding ourselves to the same standards being asked of from FarmKind. The mission motor, who advise animal advocates on measurement and evaluation, are certainly going to be busy in 2026. Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's... I think there probably is a little bit more burden on FarmKind to be doing good measurement and evaluation here, because it is kind of a risky strategy. There's, it's feasible that it backfires. But true, good to have the opportunity to remind everyone that we should be trying to do this. An interesting point about it's difficult to manage anything except corporate welfare campaigns. So that's why, arguably, why EA prioritizes that a lot, because it's like a measurement bias, right? It's easier to measure. Where does that leave us? Stein van der Ploeg. I work full-time in animal advocacy. I don't think that gives me an excuse to eat animals. I am vegan. I don't think that absolves me from donating to effective charities to reduce as much harm as possible. It's a privilege that I can do all three of these things. In this world, few people can. True. It seems good to encourage people to do everything they can, while also understanding that might be limited. So let's help people help more animals as best as they can. We need to understand better what works and work together to make that happen. True. And I will, I made this point a lot of times, but I'll make it again. It's very high quality discourse. It's very thoughtful, considerate, kind-hearted, respectful of others. It's all very high quality people engaging in this discourse. It's really, really good to see. I know a lot of these people personally, right? So I'm a little bit biased in that sense, but everybody's being so thoughtful and engaged and good faith and constructive infighting. This is constructive infighting, guys. I think everyone would agree with that sentiment. Problem is, people don't agree about whether FarmKind's campaign was aligned with it. We'd all love to be able to evaluate that. If the FarmKind campaign raises tens of millions of pounds without putting a dent in veganuary's enrolment numbers for 2026, it will be easy to declare a W. On the other hand, if they raise £0 and veganuary is cancelled, that's an L. The outcome will not be so extreme in either direction, so it is sure to hang on both difficulties in measurement and on normative questions that might reduce to first principles. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Well, so Yeah, I mean, some people are going to contest this even, and I think, uh, Patrick made the point in our debate that even if it raises a ton of money, well, we won't know that it wasn't possible to raise that much money through some other method, like they raised 2 million with the Duarkesh podcast. I think there is an amount where I think I said in that debate, if it quadruples the funding, I think there is an amount where you'd be pretty confident in saying, okay, this is probably more than we would have got, or more than we have managed to get with other fundraising campaigns. And again, it's a pretty modest amount because 300 million, sounds like a lot of money, but it's not impossible to double that with a very successful campaign. The more I think about it, the more I think that it's likely that the long-term effects are going to be positive. And this thing about, people worrying that people will donate and then feel like they don't need to change their diet. And then James Austin said it could just easily be the other way around, right? People do the diet change and don't do the donating, and that's more or less impactful. I think that's such a good point. Again, I always try and think of it from the opponent's point of view. If you were an evil, moustache twirling meat industry executive, wouldn't you much rather that your opponents carry on with saying you have to buy into this lifestyle change that most people find quite difficult before you're on the team? You certainly wouldn't want any Tom, Dick, and Harry giving money to the other side. I think that's informative to think about. I don't know. How much money is a new vegan worth? In theory, if any vegan advocacy method works at all, it should be possible for the movement to identify the cost of a new vegan, i.e., how much money we need to spend per vegan created through that method. But cost is different from value, and even still, reality is more complicated. Veganuary's strategy depends on a recognisable brand built up over more than a decade. How do we put a price tag on that? I mean, yeah, this is a good framing for it. What is the cost of a vegan? How much it costs to create? Probably some charities do have estimates of that. But yes, the value, right? Would the donor be more valuable than the vegan? Vegan use, yeah, okay, we read this. Don't really get why there's a need for the offsetting idea. Can't they just say if you eat meat, it's still good to help farm animals through charity? Yeah, but the thing is, it's got to be a bit spicy. It has to be a bit spicy to be able to get headlines in the way that it did. Let me just, my dog's barking. I think he might be barking at the door. Won't be a mo. All right. Sorry about that. Hey, we didn't really lose anyone. That's good. Appreciate you guys. Yeah, yeah. Why do they say you have to offset rather than just you could do both? I mean, I think having the edgy framing gets you so much potential for media that it's worth it to increase your reach like that. That's the bet anyway. And again, it's very difficult to keep this in mind, but it is not for us, right? As vegans, it's not a campaign aimed at us, so it's not going to be... It's expected that we would find it to be objectionable, right? Forget vegan. I'm not going to read the next thing about animal rising, by the way. Forget veganuary is a particularly poignant example, but the reality is that animal advocates are constantly forced to trade off between values and priorities that can't be easily compared. And our next case shows that these choices by no means break the movement into two simple camps. Not today, though. Well, this was a really interesting read, and I appreciate this from Sandcastle's blog. This was a long one, but it was well worth reading. We got a lot of perspectives on this. Oh, and there's comments. This is one of the FarmKind guys. One important distinction between FarmKind's campaign and Animal Rising's is that FarmKind wants veganuary to succeed. Yes, this is a good point that I think is easily lost in this context. The goal isn't to hurt veganuary or to start any sort of debate within the movement. The target audience is the majority of the public whose views on diet change are entrenched, but whose views on whether or where to donate are not. Good way of putting it as well. Rebjorn on whether there's evidence that people are more likely to donate than diet change. A forthcoming study from Rethink Priorities found people rated diet change as harder than making donations with a medium effect size. Even amongst the lowest income levels, the difficulty of making donations did not exceed the difficulty of diet change. There's a lot of nuance in this study, so I don't want to oversimplify it, but basically, watch this space. Some interesting findings on what messages look most promising for motivating action for animals coming soon. Well, that's very interesting. So there's research which has been done but not published by an effective altruism organisation which further supports the point that donations are a much easier ask than diet change. And I totally buy it. I totally buy it. You know, in my video, I looked at some of the preferences that people express about going vegan. Like 2/3 of people would rather die 10 years early than give up meat. Like, again, it's so easy to underestimate from the perspective of someone who is a vegan how difficult and demanding most people are going to find that. So I totally buy it. Hey guys. Oh, there's 10 people here. That's awesome. Don't forget to like the stream, guys. I appreciate you all being here. And if we had not had enough of reading the Sandcastles blog, well, then maybe we will after this. This is another long post. No, I'm joking, Aidan. I don't think I'll ever have enough of reading you. This is another lengthy post about FarmKind. Wow, it is lengthy. Thorough. Good. That's some other stuff here that I might look at as well. Someone made a video on this and somebody sent this to me. The Cranky Vegan. Pardon me. $10 for a sanctuary or grassroots group. Uh-oh. I don't know whether I should really just like spend time watching something that I'm probably going to disagree with. Like I said, the main thing I'm concerned with at this point is to not have the infighting be, costly enough to offset the potential good of the campaign. So I'm being a little bit selective with what to engage with. Although that said, I suppose the spirit of the last thing that we read, and I kind of agree with this, is that it has been pretty constructive infighting overall. And it's pretty healthy disagreement as far as I can tell, and thoughtful people, So maybe we will watch that. Started watching that today. Yeah, shall I give it a watch? I think his video is pretty fair. All right, let's take a look. We got more. We got another long thing to read on this, but let's watch this video. Before we do, one thing that I pulled up for this stream, I've had in my mind the phrase moral entrepreneur for FarmKind here. And I thought I might have invented that, and I thought, gosh, that sounds cool. But then I Googled it, and unfortunately, there's already a Wikipedia page. You ever get that? You ever get that when you think you've invented a sick concept, and then someone already thought of it hundreds of years before you? A norm entrepreneur or moral entrepreneur is an individual, group, or formal organization that seeks to influence a group to adopt or maintain a social norm on the basis of assumed boundaries of altruism, deviance, duty, or compassion. That's what we're looking at here. Hey, the thing I had in my mind is that they're a moral entrepreneur because they're kind of taking a moral risk, and they might end up with a huge moral payoff, but they might end up morally bankrupt, right? But this is, this is used in, people talk about policy entrepreneurs just being people who are sort of putting out novel policy ideas and furthering that concept. But yeah, moral entrepreneur. The term moral entrepreneur was coined by the sociologist Howard S. Becker in Outsiders, studying the sociology of deviance, 1963. 1963. Only beaten by 62 years then. Again, Howard S. Becker. In order to help explore the relationship between law and morality, as well as to explain how deviant social categories become defined and entrenched. In Becker's view, moral entrepreneurs fall into roughly two categories: rule creators and rule enforcers. The term norm entrepreneur was coined by Cass Sunstein in his 1996 paper titled Social Norms and Social Roles. In his paper, Sunstein highlights that existing social conditions can often be more fragile than is typically assumed, as they depend on social norms to which they may not be strongly aligned. Existing social conditions can be more fragile than is typically assumed, as they depend on social norms to which many may not be strongly aligned. Okay. I can't tell in which sense he's using norms here. Assuming he's using it in a moral sense, then I think this kind of applies to factory farming. Because it's the dominant mode of production, most people pay for it, most people are implicated in it in that sense. But when you ask them, most people say, this is wrong, we shouldn't be doing it, when it's, they're not, the norms are not aligned with it. Sunstein identifies a category of people who he calls norm entrepreneurs, who are interested in changing social norms. Their willingness and ability to persuade others of the desirability and appropriateness of certain behaviours drives the first stage of the norm life cycle, norm emergence. If they're successful in their endeavours, they can produce what he calls the norm bandwagons and norm cascades, which lead to substantial changes in social norms. Wunderlich 2020 provides an overview of norms research and discusses the emergence and development of international norms. She defines norm entrepreneurship and presents a taxonomy of various types of norm entrepreneurs, exploring their motives, objectives, and delineating the tools and conditions for their success. Wunderlich argues that there's a bias towards feel-good norm entrepreneurship. Yeah, this is one thing that I do have in mind with the FarmKind stuff. It must not feel good for the team who are doing it, right? For the FarmKind team, it kind of seems like the world's against them at the moment. I still think that there's a solid chance they're really onto something. They're really going to increase our capacity, and they're really going to save a ton of animals in the long term. And I think, if they have the stones and the minerals to see through what they've started, and the ability to execute it well, and in fact get a lot of additional donations, then I think they'll get there. But it must feel scary at the moment. And I think this is why we haven't seen this strategy. We haven't seen it yet, because it's very socially uncomfortable, basically. If you're somebody who's been in the animal movement for a long time, you've got a lot of friends in the animal movement, your identity, your relationships, your groups are all in the animal movement, you just know that you're going to pay a very high price for saying something like, doing a campaign that implies that people don't need to go vegan. They obviously knew that they're about to be cancelled by large parts of the vegan movement, right? And I think it is very brave in that sense, because I do think that they believe this is the right thing to do for animals, and that they're going to help a lot of animals by doing this. And I think there's a good chance that they're right. But yeah, it's at personal sacrifice, frankly, because it does not feel good, I'm sure. Rule creator and rule enforcer. Rule creators generally express the conviction that some kind of threatening social evil exists and must be combated. The prototype of the rule creator, Becker explains, is the crusading reformer. He is interested in the content of the rules. The existing rules do not satisfy him because there is some evil which profoundly disturbs him. He feels that nothing can be right in the world until rules are made to correct it. He operates with an absolute ethic. What he sees is truly and totally evil with no qualification. Any means is justified to do away with it. The crusader is fervent and righteous, often self-righteous. Yeah, I mean, that pretty much describes how I feel. Is self-righteous necessarily a bad thing? Wikipedia for self-righteousness. Also called sanctimony, sentientiousness, and holier-than-thou attitudes. Is an attitude and belief that moral superiority derived from a person deeming their own beliefs, actions, and affiliates to be a greater virtue than those of the average person. Well, call me self-righteous, I guess. Self-righteous individuals are intolerant of the opinions and behaviours of others that are deemed to be less moral and virtuous. Self-righteous person will often exhort or rebuke certain behaviours and actions. Okay, yeah, call me self-righteous, I guess. I've always thought when people say, oh, it's holier than thou, it's self-right, it's superiority complex, it's like, well, yeah, I think my thing's better. Right? Obviously. I think I have good reasons for thinking that as well. And I think that complaining about me thinking that is something that you would do if you kind of also thought that. If you were very, very secure in your meat eating, you probably wouldn't care if I thought that I was better than you for being vegan. But if you kind of think that I'm better than you for being vegan, then that probably really irks you. So, call me self-righteous, I guess. Operates with an absolute ethic. That seems like maybe not. Moral absolutism is a meta-ethical view that some or even all actions are intrinsically right or wrong regardless of context or consequence. Yeah, okay, so I guess not in this case, right? Not in the case of FarmKind, at least. Maybe in the case of the vegan, but not in the case of the vegan 2.0. Yeah, self-righteous vegan 2.0s rise up. These moral crusaders are primarily focused on successful persuasion of others, with less concern about the means by which this persuasion is achieved. Successful moral crusades are generally dominated by those in the upper social strata of society. They often include religious groups, law-making bodies, and stakeholders in a given field. There is political competition in which these moral crusaders originate crusades aimed at generating reform, based on what they think is moral, therefore defining deviance. Moral crusaders must have power, public support, generate public awareness of the issue, and be able to propose a clear and acceptable solution to the problem. The degree of a moral entrepreneur's power is highly dependent upon the social and cultural context. Must have power, public support, generate public awareness of the issue, and be able to propose a clear and acceptable solution. Some to some degree. I think the part that we've been missing for the most part is the clear and acceptable solution, when all we have to ask people to do is to go vegan, and most people are not willing to do that, and not even really willing to engage with our requests to do it. Public awareness, I mean, most people know that factory farms exist, and I think, you know, so in surveys, people tend to underestimate how many animals come from factory farms. And then they also do this self-serving thing of even further underestimating how many of the animals that they eat come from factory farms. Right, must be everybody else who's eating the factory farmed animals, they think. Power, public support, I mean, yeah, the public generally opposes factory farming when you ask them about it. And power, well, that's very contextual, I suppose. The sociology of social control seeks to predict and explain the behaviour of both rule creators and rule enforcers. Well, we didn't really read about rule enforcers here, did we? This is all creators. Maybe we're going to read about it now. The creation and application of explicit rules are seen as characteristics of moralism, or the tendency to treat people as enemies. Eh? Oh, okay. Okay. Or the tendency to treat people... Okay. Sorry, I read that as if that was the definition of moralism, but that's that's not how it was written. Among the social conditions that are identified as sources of moralism are status superiority and social remoteness between the agents of social control and the people whose behaviour they regulate. Thus, the most likely targets of both rule creators and rule enforcers are those who are socially inferior, culturally different, and personally unknown. It is their behaviour that is most likely to seem objectionable and to call forth the strenuous efforts of moral entrepreneurs. Once moral entrepreneurs or claims makers, that's another new term we haven't had yet. Well, I guess it just means people making claims. Define the behaviours of these individuals or groups as deviant or a moral threat, then the entire group may be seen by society as a deviant subculture. Similarly, they or their behaviour may be seen as the roots of the next moral panic. This is often the goal of the moral entrepreneurs, to rally the support of society behind their specific aim through the redefining of behaviours and groups as deviant or problematic. Alternately, those individuals with social power, wealth, high status, or large public support bases are the most likely to assert this power and to act as moral entrepreneurs. Okay, well, cool phrase. I don't know if I want to read the rest of this necessarily. Social problems, lawmaking. Yeah, okay, I think this is going to be... Yeah, I think this is a bit beyond the use case for us. All right, well, we did a lot of reading there. You all were very good, so we can watch a video now. Let's see what the Cranky Vegan has to say about the Forget Veganuary campaign.
Hey everybody, welcome to 2026. People sure are angry that Tony Vernelli quit Veganuary to join FarmKind, to stop pushing veganism and start encouraging meat eating. But is it really that simple? And maybe we're pointing fingers at the wrong person.
This does sound like it's in danger of being nuanced and thoughtful.
Hey folks, welcome to 2026. Another year of activism, another year of the Cranky Vegan. I know you're really excited. The matching donations we were doing on the Cranky Vegan Patreon went really well. We were able to send, I think, over $11,000 in November and December to a bunch of sanctuaries that needed help. So that felt really great. The matching donations are over for the time being, but you can join us for as little as $2 if you want, and you won't find ACE charity evaluators telling you who to donate to. So there's that. I'll see you over there. All right, let's dive right into this thing. People were really outraged about this story when it broke in late December, and people are still talking about it, that Tony Vernelli left her job of 6 years promoting veganism as the head of communications at Veganuary to join FarmKind, an organization that uses a calculator to determine how much money you could donate to animal groups to like zero out your animal eating habits. Like they have a calculator on their site where you can like put in how many animals you eat in a week, like 4 servings of cow, 2 cups of milk, 4 eggs, and then boom, it spits out a dollar amount. Just donate $23 monthly to one of these fine organizations and you'll be in the clear. You'll be at net zero. Eat as many animals as you want and adjust the calculator. But yeah, the calculator, Tony switching from this to that and vegan to carnivore. Naturally, vegans lost their minds, right? How dare she give up on veganism to push eating animals? And mainstream media ate it up.
Maybe this is deliberate, but I noticed that I think he's going to go on to be kind of supportive of this campaign. But I noticed they kind of described the calculator as many vegans seem to find it like intuitively a bit offensive or necessarily a bad thing, but didn't really say that it is. So maybe he's going to go on to give a defense of the calculator. I mean, I don't see what's wrong with the calculator in principle, and this is my thing with the deontological attack on the theory of change, or the kind of view that you can't offset, or that it needs to be a very, very high amount of harm to offset. I've always thought that when you're just talking about more beings, surely you are just increasing the quantity of rights violations, or even like worse treatment. Even surely you could say they're having their rights violated to a greater extent, or having more rights violated. So it's not clear that that deontology has like a kind of 1 or 0 view, and that utilitarianism is more like a sliding scale. Like in the trolley problem, isn't the choice just between the rights of one person and the rights of 5 people? You're still going to have more rights violations if you don't flick the switch, right? So I've never quite understood that criticism of utilitarianism, I guess.
Big stories in the UK tabloids about vegan activists becomes carnivore. But the question is, does it really matter? And is she really switching teams, or is she just being more transparent, really, like about what she and Veganuary have been doing all along? Let's discuss. First off, I understand why people are so frustrated and upset about this turn of events. I totally understand. We have someone that spent decades fighting for animals and promoting veganism through Veganuary, and now all of a sudden she's telling people to, just eat animals and donate money instead. Let's tackle that first, because when we look around the animal community, Veganuary is often touted as the biggest vegan outreach campaign in the world, to which I would reply,
"You sure about that?" You sure about that?
To be clear, I think Veganuary gets some things right. And this is something I've always said, right? I think it looks great, which is important. I think it's really wide reaching. They make it easy. It's all inclusive. And all those things are important, particularly when doing outreach. But at its core, Veganuary isn't really about veganism. It's about reducitarianism. It's about getting people to eat less animals. Or as the new CEO, Wendy Matthews, states, it's, quote, less about changing, rather helping you make small shifts. I'm certainly not a believer in perfection, and I adhere to the idea that perfection gets in the way of the good.
Yeah, this is kind of the criticism on the Forget FarmKind website, by the way. Anyone seen that? ForgetFarmKind.com. I don't know who made this. But it was only a matter of time. I was speaking about... I said the Veganuary should have made this as a counter donation drive, but don't think this is the official Veganuary version. And it's very critical of FarmKind, but it's also kind of critical of Veganuary, and is saying, this is baby steps, basically. Which, I think is just a little bit of a missed opportunity in this context. But presumably the hope is that people, a lot of people doing Veganuary go on to remain vegan and hopefully be vegan 2.0, right? If you do Veganuary 2.0, maybe.
But I also think you need to be upfront with what you're doing, because if you're partnering with huge corporations that kill billions of animals a year and make a boatload of money off it, and you're working to get them to add a plant-based item or two to their menus, only for them to remove said items at the end of January so they can make money off of people trying to reduce their animal eating. I'm not sure that's what veganism is. That's not how I would necessarily define it, and maybe that doesn't matter anymore, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with companies making money, and I think it's almost all food outlets do serve meat and animal products, and we all want them to have vegan options. We wish they would keep them, but I don't think it's somehow bad to be working with companies that serve meat.
Veganism is. People are quickly redefining veganism to just be about diet. People are quickly co-opting this liberation movement to make it a right-wing soapbox. What vegan used to mean is slowly being eroded away by a movement desperate to be accepted by anyone, even if it's just for a month. But personally, I do think veganism and its definition matters, right? When Veganuary celebrates every year, the number of people who ate less animals a day is seen as a success. That feels like it's missing the mark, right? And we all wonder why people so quickly leave veganism as fast as they joined it, and why our vegan populations never really grow more than a percentage point or two. And I think that it's in part because we have stripped away the meaning of veganism, and instead we made it a diet. And a diet that it's okay to hop in and hop out of like it's a Movember challenge. So when Tony switched to Kind Farm to encourage people...
This is another talking point I never quite understood when people say veganism is not a diet. I mean, I get it, there are other non-diet things that being vegan entails, like leather and wool and stuff like that. But it is mostly a diet, right? That's the most, the area that it interacts with the most. Is the implication that diet means temporary or fad, or I'm going to finish my diet? Do you know, is that why people say that? Because there is, of course, a vegan diet, like that phrase makes sense. I understand that people are saying veganism is more than that, but I don't know, there just doesn't seem like that meaningful a distinction, I guess. Aidan from FarmKind reached out on Reddit in the comments and said we'll include it in some press release that are going out. Hopefully it'll get some traction that way. Oh, Sam, you made the Forget FarmKind website? No way. Nice. I mean, I saw this getting a lot of love, so, I think it's definitely scratching the itch for some vegans. I think, yeah, I'd like to see a little counter fundraising campaign. You got the Try Veganuary link here, which I appreciate. Oh no, it goes to a okay. Oh, you do have the thing here. Summit Challenge 22. Donate to Veganuary, dude. Put the Veganuary donation page on here. I think that would be such a good. Oh, you did? Because wouldn't it be cool? The thing that I keep on saying on this is that so many vegans disagree with this campaign and disagree with my take on this campaign and feel very strongly and feel very defensive of veganism and of Veganuary. I think there's so much. If you click on Grow Up, there's so much opportunity to. Oh hell yeah! Oh okay, I had not seen this page. Decided to act like a grown-up vegan, active vegan. Hell yeah! Speaks up for the animals, donates, educates. Oh yeah, okay, nice. This is impressive, dude. I saw on Reddit that you said you made this in a couple of days. Extra firm tofu. That's us, lads and ladies. Firm tofu, extra firm tofu. That's what I look like as well if I take my shirt off. All right, nice. Well, I appreciate that. Oh, okay, nice. You got all sorts of links down here. Animal Justice Project, We the Free. Wouldn't it be crazy if your website raised more than the Forget Veganuary website? Wouldn't that be cool? That's really, really cool, dude. Yeah, I'm glad that you put the donation stuff on there. That's really awesome. Grow up. Nice. And you know what I like about this as well? I really don't think that the. Oh, well, you said you reach out and they'll include in a press release. Yeah, because I was going to say, I don't think that the FarmKind guys would mind this either. I think of. Tom Norman on that David Rams interview saying that he wouldn't mind a campaign called Tom Norman Sucks if he thought it would help more animals. I think he's being sincere in that. I think that their attitude with doing the Forget Veganuary thing, which again they're in fact supportive of Veganuary, right? That they are playing the game and they understand that it makes it a bit interesting for the media and stuff like this. So honestly, this is another good extension of the story, and will be another reason for journalists to write about this, right? The latest twist in the Veganuary tale. So yeah, fair play to you for carrying on the discourse. Soy Daddy have been posting Forget FarmKind. Yeah, I've seen this around. I've seen a lot of people posting this. AY posted it earlier as well.
People to just give money to animal charities and don't worry about whether or not you're eating said animals. Was she really abandoning her values and the animals, or was she just being a little more upfront and transparent about what Veganuary has basically been celebrating for years? And she's just
nice, Samuel. Yeah, I can see why they need to be a little bit careful about what they're saying, because obviously it's very much thoughtful about how the public is seeing the campaign. And this is, I've been seeing that they have not really rushed to defend themselves and say, oh, I'm actually vegan, because that's going to undermine the campaign. They can't be saying that. That's not part of the campaign. Yeah, thank you, Samuel. I think that's a really cool extension to the discourse.
Doing it with another organization. I mean, let's be fair, right? FarmKind does say that, quote, diet change is a great way to help animals, but it's not the only way or the best way. And I have to say, like, that's true. I agree with that. When given the choice, if I had to decide between someone who went through, veganuary and became plant-based and now sits at home eating Beyond Burgers and diet cheese and arguing on Facebook comment sections every day, and they're simply convinced their government wasn't spending billions of dollars to subsidize the meat and dairy industries to keep them open when they fall short economically during like a pandemic or say a boycott like veganism, or a vegetarian or a reducitarian person who found their way to grassroots animal activism from a group like Animal Activists Collective or something, and was hitting the streets protesting for animals as part of pressure campaigns, and then transitioning to veganism along the way, I'd much prefer that person over the former. And that's where I think FarmKind and I disagree. Instead of building up a community, FarmKind is basically saying like, nah, we got enough people. We got it from here, bro. You keep eating your bacon and drinking whole fat milk and give us your money and we'll take care of the problem. No worries. And here's the major problem in all of this that no one is really talking about, and maybe why our anger shouldn't be directed at Tony, who ultimately is the symptom of this problem, not the root cause. So if you go into FarmKind's webpage after you fill out your calculator of death and it spits out a monthly dollar amount, the groups they suggest to donate to looks awfully familiar. The Humane League, Good Food Institute, Fish Welfare Institute, where I see, oh yeah, the Animal Charities Evaluator site. Kind Farm mentions in their FAQ that they use
It keeps saying Kind Farm
to make their charity selections, and it wouldn't come as a surprise to me if there was huge overlaps in staff and advisors and volunteers. ACE is basically an organization that stems from effective altruism, meaning an organization that evaluates other organizations based on effective altruist parameters, which I like to summarize as things that look great on paper but can't actually be applied to real life. ACE.
Ooh, big shout. That's an interesting claim. I mean, the guy's video has been pretty good so far. So, 7 minutes in getting that. That feels like I don't like it, but maybe that means I can grow from it. Let's see what he has to say.
ACE then makes suggestions as to who are the most effective organizations for animals and requests that you should give all your money to those specific organizations. This has wide sweeping results as billionaires and millionaires and their funded organizations like FarmKind dump all their money into these few specific organizations based on the idea that the more you give to one of them, that translates into actual animals being saved. This, of course, is preposterous. There's no one sitting at the slaughterhouse saying, Kind Farm got another $30. Go grab 4.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that, but it's estimated of these various different ways of impacting supply and demand. Oh, let's give them the benefit of the doubt.
4 chickens and a goat, drop them off in the pasture. But what FarmKind means is that by giving $10 to Kind Farm, who then passes it on to the Humane League, for instance, you are helping 8 hens live a life free of cruel confinement. This is because Humane League has been running cage-free campaigns for 10 years, trying to get rid of cages. But of course, as we all know, that just means they're just all crammed into one barn, one giant cage. But for just $10, you can keep those chickens in one big cage instead of a few small ones. And according to Kind Farm, eat them at the same time. Victory. They say...
Well, I think that's half the story. First of all, that may well be an improvement for the chicken's own welfare. It could be, yeah, I mean, obviously this is pretty crowded, but it could be worse. That's absolutely the case that it could be worse. And if you're moving away from a system that's worse, then this is better, right? So that's one thing. But the other thing is, the main point that I always talk about here is increasing the cost of production and therefore decreasing the number of animals farmed overall. They're doing whatever they can do to produce as cheaply as possible whilst getting away with it. And so if you have some standards, it's going to raise that floor.
Say that all the money goes to improving the lives of factory farmed animals, in part because some of those organizations are getting better chicken commitments from big corporations. And who's signed on to the better chicken commitment? Burger King, Jack in the Box, Starbucks, and Purdue, the 4th largest chicken killer in the United States, who is now featured on the BCC website saying that they are, quote, committed to providing customers a sustainable supply of chicken that meets all 2024 animal welfare criteria outlined in the Better Chicken Commitment. This
Well, that's good. I mean, that's good, isn't it? That's good, isn't it? I mean, there does need to be welfare standards and welfare criteria, and we do want big companies to meet those. Yeah, that seems like it's not a bad thing, even though even though he said it in that voice.
24 animal welfare criteria outlined in the Better Chicken Commitment. This is what your money is going towards, giving Purdue a pat on the back for killing more chickens a year than almost anyone else in the US in a way that's sustainable. You can read that as feel good about eating these.
Well, it's interesting that they've used the word sustainable because it's not really about sustainability, right? But that meets animal welfare criteria, I guess, is the main point here. As to giving them a pat on the back, I mean, it's all relative, isn't it? There's the sort of good cop and the bad cop methods in these corporate campaigns. So yeah, if you do want companies to adopt the more expensive production system, they need to feel incentivized to do that. So they need to have a feeling that there's going to be some punishment and some public shame and stuff like that if they don't do it. And that's what we do on the Fast Action Network when we go and comment on their social medias. But I think it's fine to also have, these are the companies who have done it, well done them. It doesn't need to imply that, therefore, everyone should go and buy chicken from this place. But yeah, I mean, if they are meeting welfare standards that other people are not meeting, then fair play to them, right?
Outlined in the Better Chicken Commitment. This is what your money is going towards, giving Purdue a pat on the back for killing more chickens a year than almost anyone else in the US in a way that's sustainable. You can read that as feel good about eating these chickens. They're sustainable. And sure, we can say this is just one organization, but it's not. All of this is funded by a small group of very rich people who don't just fund this drivel, but animal activists like Joey Carbstrong and big groups like the Save Movement and PETA and Mercy for Animals, or whatever they're calling themselves after they've fired all the pro-Palestinian employees and then turn around and fire the executive director. And with that money comes very strong influence on which direction these individuals and groups have to shift their focus and strategy. And while I'm sure most of these rich folks are well-intentioned, they are being conned by altruistic animal welfarists to steer a liberation movement towards a welfare state, where change doesn't actually happen in the lives of these animals, but on paper, where the amount of money you donate or raise for them.
Well, again, I don't think so. This is obviously like a strict abolitionist perspective. I think the abolitionists really ought to get the point about the supply and demand curve, where the welfare standards is going to also decrease the number of animals being farmed. But why would we think that it doesn't actually affect any animals' lives and only on paper? Like, I understand that his perspective is to say that the improved conditions are still not good enough, but it could still be much better than they would be otherwise.
But on paper, where the amount of money you donate or raise for them suddenly equates to an exact number of animals helped, despite the fact that all the chickens.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, it's estimated, isn't it? That's why it's kind of rounded to the nearest 1,000 for these. Yeah, it's estimated. I don't know what else to say about that.
Helped, all the pigs helped, all the fish helped, are all dead so that people can eat them. Where those with the most money or influence get to make the biggest strategic decisions for an entire movement, despite the fact that they have no background as an organizer or an activist or a strategist. It's absolutely maddening.
I'm not sure if that's... Wait, let me hear that again.
Strategic decisions, eat them. Where those with the most money or influence get to make the biggest strategic decisions for an entire movement, despite the fact that they have no background as an organizer or an activist or a strategist.
well, they probably do have background as a strategist if they've got a lot of money and influence to make strategic decisions, right? I can see this being a bit of a thing where, street activists might be resentful of behind the desk types. And if you're not turning up to the march, it's not proper. But yeah, I don't think that that's as valuable a distinction as one might imagine. I used to work in a pub, right? And it must be my first day or my first week, and someone's showing me how to pour pints properly, right? The guy who's no longer the newest guy on the bar, showing the newest guy on the bar how to pull pints, and he said, I'm better at pulling pints than Dan, the manager. I was like, all right, it's good. He said, yeah, sure, I should be running this place. And I thought, well, that doesn't necessarily follow. The manager probably doesn't need to pull that many pints. He might be better at accounts. But yeah, I think that it's easy for people who feel like they're doing the grassroots work, or I shouldn't say feel like, people who are doing the grassroots work, to imagine that people who are not doing that are lacking in some essential insight, right? Where it could easily be the case that like somebody's really well studied on this and an expert on it, and they've never been to a protest march, but like that doesn't mean that they're wrong. Do you believe it increasing welfare automatically means increasing costs, taking into account subsidies? Well, I don't think the subsidies, presumably they're getting the subsidies either way, right? I have seen some campaigns where they're trying to get subsidies for welfare improvements, like pay farmers to go cage free or something like that, like from industry. This is so that's quite validating of what I'm saying, in that the main thing that's going on here is increasing the cost of production. I think that the thing that's fairly safe to assume is that the farms are going to be doing it as cheaply as possible without being the wrong side of the law. So if there is some new law that comes in and they have to do something that they weren't doing before, well, if they weren't doing it before, that's probably because it was more expensive than what they were doing, right? I do agree that the word save is misleading. Even the vegan movement, when people say go vegan, save X animals per year. Well, I mean, yeah, again, it's like save from being bred into existence, right? Which is like the counterfactual of everyone were to go vegan. That there wouldn't be any animals bred into existence.
It's absolutely maddening. And so we can be mad at Tony for going from one reducitarian welfare organization to another, but I think we're missing the point. Our whole movement is being pushed deeper into welfarism because the group of people who hold the purse strings keeps getting smaller and smaller and more conservative. So what's left to do but keep fighting?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that anti-welfarism is a good thing. I know that I've come across some animal people who like won't sign the petition for cage free because they think it's too welfare. It's not abolitionist, right? Like that's got to be a psyop, right? They're not mutually exclusive. Again, you can do the vegan campaigning and do the welfare campaigning and recognize that they both actually help each other. So that said, right, I'm being very critical of the last kind of 3 minutes here, which I think is where our disagreements came in. But yeah, I have to say most of this video was like pretty well balanced. I was expecting it to be more. I was expected to be harsher on FarmKind, I guess. But I think it was pretty well balanced. There was a couple of things that he read as if they were a problem, but I'm not convinced that they are necessarily. But I think that was pretty fair overall. Right. I'm going to wrap it up there, guys. We just did, well, nearly 3 hours. I'm glad we finished off that one blog, and we're going to save this one for next time. Vegans and monks. So I might stream a little bit tomorrow. And I have some exciting content coming for you guys next week, because I'm going to be speaking with someone from Veganuary tomorrow about the FarmKind campaign. We're going to do it recorded, not live, so it won't be live tomorrow. It might be uploaded in the evening, but there'll be another installation in the discourse here. And yeah, it should be pretty good. I'm speaking with one of the co-founders, and they haven't spoken about it publicly, so I think it's going to be a good opportunity to, get some more information on this, frame this a little better. I'm really keen that it is part of the healing of what infighting has happened, or that it's presented in a way which is very, doesn't encourage destructive infighting. And what a great blog that blog was, right? I'll definitely read this one on stream another time, probably most likely tomorrow, to be honest, because I really enjoyed that last one. And this seems like more of the person's own prose. The last one was a lot of quotes, which I think was good. But I did enjoy this person's writing, so I'll be looking forward to reading this tomorrow. All right, guys, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much for joining. I appreciate you guys being here, as always. We'll have some more good content on this topic. There's more good discourse. I really think we could be on the way to making a huge change for animals, and it's up in the air at the moment. There's, moral entrepreneurs at work. We'll see. We'll see how this comes out. See you, Oppenheimer. See you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Take care, guys. Cheers.